Well, welcome to a special edition of ATG Live. We're part of the SSW Network. I'm Pete Fletzer. I'm joined, as I always am, by my good friend and co-host, Nick Mielke. Nick, how you doing, my friend?
I am super excited to be a part of this conversation. This is something that you and I have talked about for a lot of time,
Yep.
a long time.
A lot of long
It's something that comes up in a lot of our weekly discussions because Star Wars is this interconnected universe or galaxy, if you will. And these ideas of how do these movies connect? How do we look at these movies now? Several of them have been out for a decently extended period of time.
Yep.
This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a really long time. So I'm doing fantastic and I can't wait to get into it.
That's awesome. Well, tonight we are talking about the good, the bad, and the controversy. And we're going to be digging into the Star Wars sequels, as Nick alluded to. You know, we have been a little bit on hiatus with the podcast of late. So what we're doing tonight is we're recording a podcast, and we've invited the world to come and hang out with us while we do this. And this podcast is going to dig into just the full and honest look at the sequels. You know, I think we find a lot of times that we end up sort of guarding our position simply because it's not worth the hassle and headache of online. But tonight we're going to dig into it. You know, as Nick, as you said, you know, I often say on ATG Live, I have special feelings about the the Rise of Skywalker.
Yep.
I'm going to share them tonight. I'm going to dig into some of my issues with it.
Matthew is in the chat. He said, I'm ready for Pete to give his R-rated Tross review.
It would be R-rated. Well, there may be an F-bomb or two, but I'll do my best to keep it family friendly. But it is true. I mean, we do tend to be, you know, and that's one of the things that's really important to keep in mind about the podcast and about what we do is we do keep things very positive, right? We don't get sucked into the negativity and the toxicity, but we fight against it and we call it out, which is what I think makes it difficult sometimes for us to have these very real and very open conversations about the sequels, because as great as they are, there are also things that are worth discussing that may or may not be as good, right? And we've wanted that open opportunity to have that conversation. So as I was saying before, this is normally a podcast. Well, not normally a podcast. ATG Live is our live Thursday night show. So if you're joining us for the first time, make sure to come back on Thursday night. We do the news, we do conversation, we do some deep dives, but this is a little bit of a different type of show for us. Make sure to subscribe to Around the Galaxy wherever you get your podcast, because that's where this is going to go. And there's going to be a lot more stuff coming into the podcast stream in the very near future. But Nick, this is a judgment-free zone tonight. We are not, we're taking off the gloves a little bit, but we're also, I think it's important to note that there's no venom intended with any of the comments that may or may not come out over the next couple.
That's right. We are the Planet Fitness of Star Wars Sequel Trilogy conversations. We're not going to judge you. We're not going to gatekeep. We're going to share our feelings about these movies.
Right.
But just because I feel one way and Pete feels another way and one of you feels another way doesn't mean that any of us are wrong or right. It simply means that's what art is. That's what critique is, and the ability to look at something. And the thing you will notice is as we go through this night and as we have these conversations, it's not going to be gatekeeping. It's not going to be assholery, if you will.
Right.
It's simply going to be our personal feelings on these three movies that make up the Skywalker saga.
Yep. And it's true. I mean, these conversations have been had before. There's 1,000 podcasts that have said what was everything wrong with the sequel trilogy or everything great about the sequel trilogy. But this is just our perspective. This is two Gen Xers who have been Star Wars fans for life and are revisiting the sequels because they have changed everything about Star Wars, looking backwards and looking forward, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But Nick, first, maybe tell, for people who are new and joining us for the first time or listening to this as a podcast for the first time, maybe give us a little bit, the short version of your sort of Star Wars story. And you're muted.
This is how it's going to go. And that's the other thing with this show tonight. We're not in our usual spot. We're only a tiny bit off our game, so it's going to be a little bit loose, but that's going to be fun. We want to
be a bitch to edit. I don't mind telling you that right now.
That's Pete's problem. Yes, Born in 1978, so just right behind when Star Wars first came out. Grew up with it. There has literally not been a time in my life where I did not have Star Wars. The first Star Wars that I remember seeing in the movie theater, I saw Return of the Jedi at a drive-in movie theater in Central Illinois, where I lived at the time, in my parents' station wagon. The other movies that I watched were on recorded Betamax tapes that my dad recorded off HBO, and I absolutely wore those tapes out. So
you were the guy that
I have always.
Betamax.
I was that guy. My dad, fun fact, my dad is one of the luckiest like win radio contest guys. Like even now, like wins tickets to concerts and baseball games and all this kind of crap. When I was a kid, he won a year's supply of Betamax videotapes from a radio station contest that were blank, and they came in like a case. And I think it was like, I don't know what constituted a year's worth of Betamax, but he won like 30 or 40 blank VHS or Betamax tapes. So Star Wars. Been around my entire life, grew up with it, went through the quote unquote dark times, read all the books in middle school, went to college, special editions came out, prequels came out when I was in college, and then, just continued forward from there. So it has always been a part of my life. Star Wars and Indiana Jones. Those are the two things that I've always been obsessed with and have kind of dictated a lot of the entertainment aspects of my life.
And it's important. The reason I'm bringing this up, and I'll share my story in just a second as well, but it's going to be very important to understand where we come from as fans as we look at the sequels, because a lot of fans, because there is that broad range of fandom, whether it's the OG, OT folks like us, sequel trilogy kids like my kids, or prequel trilogy, understanding where you're coming from certainly will have an influence there. But I grew up, I was born in 1970. So I saw A New Hope in the theaters in 1977, the summer of 77. Before it was A New Hope, it was just Star Wars at the time. Like you, saw all the movies, saw the rest of them in the theater, and made it through the dark times before the prequels came out. But during the time, just before the prequels and during the special editions, I was very fortunate to be a freelance writer who was doing work for the Lucasfilm publication, Star Wars Galaxy magazine. Got to work with Steve Sansweet and got to be more heavily engaged with the special editions, which of course led to the prequels, but also got the opportunity to be at a number of at all three of the prequel premieres in New York City. So the reason I say that is because if we're being real here, I want to get your take as well, Nick, but I think we're both in the same category of people who, as Star Wars fans, to be real, we were not necessarily the biggest fans of the prequels. I know that we've both come around. We've both sort of changed our perspective on it. But Nick, what was your impression of the prequels when they first hit?
I was thrilled that we were getting new Star Wars. We didn't think when Return of the Jedi ended. I think, in fact, your dad said this when I was up with you guys in New Jersey a couple weeks ago for Potathon. And that Sunday afternoon, I got to hang out with your dad, who I respect and admire so much. And we were just talking about Star Wars and when things came out and, talking about being of an era where Star Wars ended in 1983. And you thought, that's it. Like this thing that was a flash in the pan that was so great for such a short period of time, it's going to go away and you're not going to have any more. To find out, wait, there's going to be more. That was all I needed as a Star Wars kid. I was like, there's going to be more Star Wars and George Lucas is doing it. Like you didn't have to say anything else. And then the trailer came out. And I remember when the trailer came out, back when Apple trailers was a thing. And like you'd go to the Apple movie trailers website and you could click on it to try and stream it, which again, at that point in the, early to mid 90s, or you could download it. And I remember clicking to download that trailer and I didn't want it to play because you had like the buffering thing and the bar would move along. Like I didn't want it to play until I had the whole thing because I didn't want it to get interrupted. I didn't want it to wait.
Right.
And so I was in college, halfway through college, and had a desktop computer that our college, quote unquote, gave us. I paid for it for paying for college.
Sure.
But we had T1 internet access, which at the time was
T1
like as fast as it could be. Like it was a big deal. Plugged directly into the internet, apparently. So when that trailer came out and we get, that's right. It took like 16 hours to download. Like you waited for it to be all the way downloaded so it wouldn't clip or interrupt. But I watched that trailer and my imagination just went crazy. Like we get this crazy red devil looking dude with the double lightsaber. We get Ewan McGregor. We've got Liam Neeson's. You know, all of these things are happening, and we're like, it's back. Star Wars is back.
Yep.
And then I went and saw that movie, and I thought, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And I said this recently in another conversation. I spent a decent amount of time in college, after college, for some years going forward, being that's not my Star Wars guy.
Right. Yep.
Not hateful. I didn't dwell on it, but I just went, I like the first ones, the original. Yep. I'm an OT guy. That's my deal.
Guy. Yep.
I simply went, I kind of did the whole, like, I don't really acknowledge that. And that was a little too jerky, but not nearly as much as what you see, you know, now. But that was where I started.
Right.
But I think with age, with wisdom, with maturity, and as you see the way the world works and things happen, you start to learn more about what happened to Jake Lloyd, what happened to Ahmed Best, what happened to the creators and the people that made these stories, the horrible other actual real life things that happen in the world, that you start to go, maybe I should reconsider my point on.
But do you think it's life that's doing that, or do you think it's? I mean, I also think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Star Wars as a universe has expanded so much, and so like when I look at the prequels now, they're a different story because of the lore that goes along with it, and I think that's why a lot of the people who, like you, like me, I mean, when I walked out of the Phantom Menace premiere in New York City, I remember I was honestly like disappointed. I didn't know what to think. I've told the stories too many times about with some of the celebrities that were there, what they said, but the reality was I was disappointed. But now I look back at those movies and I really enjoy them because of what has come since and what has come in to fill in those gaps. And yeah, I mean, that did not stop. I mean, this was we say that The Last Jedi was really where a lot of the fan controversy came in, and we'll get to that, of course, a little bit later. But this was a time when fans were literally saying, George Lucas, the quote was, George Lucas raped my childhood. That gets you nowhere. There was a film called The People versus George Lucas. There was the entire Red Letter Media 10-hour assessment. I think it was 10 hours. I don't know if it was or not, but it was a very long assessment of the Phantom Menace. And it took it apart piece by piece, and it talked about why they hated it so much. And again, this is going to come up very important when we get into the return of Star Wars through the Disney acquisition. But there are a lot of people today, the casual fans, and Nick, I think it's important to mention and reference that, especially if you're listening to this podcast as somebody who just found a Star Wars podcast, there's a couple different layers and levels of Star Wars fandom, and it's not meant in gatekeeping at all, but there's the casual fan, which is literally 90% of the world. Those are the people that Disney is trying to get to Disney World, to try to get Disney Plus subscriptions to watch movies when they come out in the theaters. That's the most of the world. The fact that you and I spend too many hours a day on social media and have podcasts and do a weekly show, we're in that rarefied air of people who overly think about Star Wars. And so the people, though, who felt burnt by the prequels, and that was a lot of fans. Not everybody said George Lucas raped their childhood, but a lot of people did say, this sucks. I still talk to people today. I still talk to big fans of Star Wars who say, hate Jar Jar Binks. It was too childish. The acting sucked, this and that. And again, it's a perspective. And I think it's still a lot more prevalent than people think.
Yeah. And I think, like you talked about that 90%, and I mentioned earlier your dad. You and I talk all the time. I kind of call it the my dad factor. Both of our dads, similar ages and generations, introduce us to science fiction and the things that we grew up with. They are also essentially a part of that 90%. Like, they're fans, they love it, but they're not watching all the animation. They're not reading the books. I mean, my dad read the books in the 90s when that's all we had.
Right.
But now he's like, hey, when's that next show coming out? Didn't I see a trailer for that thing on Disney Plus? Like, it's what's most widely accessible. My mother, when Mandalorian came out, hasn't cared about Star Wars basically my entire life, but thought Baby Yoda was cute. And my dad got her a Baby Yoda stuffed animal for Christmas because or stuffed creature or whatever. I guess it's not a stuffed animal, but
Stuff sentient. Maybe.
Yeah, because marketing works and
Right.
broad-based, that kind of thing that works and appeals. I do want to bring up this comment from Jedi of Chicago. Said I was more disappointed in the prequels than anything else. They didn't live up to the hype that I had for them, but the supplementary materials has made them much richer. And I think that's important because we have this, especially now in the current climate with Disney Plus and shows and movies and social media and the access we have to creators and podcasts and interviews and previews and all the things that come out. Most of the time, we're the ones that are hyping it up to here.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is it's going to fall somewhere short because what I want in a show is not necessarily what Leslie Headland is going to make into a show.
Sure.
It's not what Dave Filoni is going to make into a show. And so hype and disappointment. And I admire people who go, I'm going full blackout. I don't want to watch a single trailer. I don't want to watch I can't do it. I'm not built that way. But the people that go, I just want to come in and enjoy it and see what happens without expectation, that is something to be admired, because half the time that's what takes us out is our expectation, our predisposed 100%. Notions of what it's supposed to be.
100%. And when we get to the Last Jedi conversation, we'll hit on that, because that harmed me as well. But to Jedi of Chicago, I ask you to hang on and keep that thought in the conversation, because supplementary materials are one of the best things and one of the worst things that's happening as it relates to the sequels in the current state of Star Wars, in my opinion. And we'll get to that in just a second. And I love that comment, because I too feel exactly the same way. I think the reason I like the prequels now more than I did in the past, and I'm a bit, I've said it to you before, Nick, like the when people ask if you're going to put a Star Wars movie in, which one are you going to watch? Which one's going to be the first one that you pull up on Disney Plus? A couple of years ago, I would have said Empire Strikes Back, which is still my favorite Star Wars movie, period, bar none. There's no sense in having the discussion. But if I'm going to sit through a Star Wars movie, I think The Phantom Menace might be the one that I put in. And that shocks me. That shocks me because of the way I felt about it when I walked out the door, when I went for 20 years not liking that movie. 20 years. Right. It took me until about 1999 or 2019 rather to get to a point where I loved it. And I love that movie now. I really do.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that, because that's going to come back in circle for me as we get into these three sequel movies. Also, as far as rewatchability, rankings, I know you did the poll on Twitter earlier to kind of find out, of the three, which people, all that kind of stuff. I have another thought to that is a little bit counter to, common perception and whatever, but that's another funny thing. You've said that about Last Jedi a bunch of times, that it's not the one you put in. It's the one that's so good, but it's heavy. It's kind of, for me, it's like Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is a phenomenal TV show.
Sure.
I've watched it, I think, 2 times, top to bottom, because it's heavy. Like, it's not the most rewatchable show that's out there. And that's saying a lot, because I rewatch Game of Thrones and Sopranos every single year, and Deadwood every single year. But there's something about Breaking Bad that feels bleak and stark and heavy, and it's a different thing. Last Jedi has some of those same elements. Like, it's a heavy movie.
For sure. And so, again, we were in this position, this spot where the reality of the world that we were in was that in 2012, October 30th, 2012, was the day that Disney announced that they had purchased Lucasfilm for a measly $4.05 billion. Peanuts. And they immediately announced that new Star Wars was going to be on the horizon, that a new trilogy was already planned that would extend the Skywalker saga. And I remember my father and I had conversations for quite a while, even when I was doing work with Star Wars Galaxy magazine. We used to talk about how great it would be if Lucasfilm was to give up Star Wars a little bit and put out a call for others to write stories, to write movies in the Star Wars universe. And so when I heard that there was a new Star Wars trilogy on the horizon coming from Disney, my initial response was good. And again, when I went back and I saw my Facebook comment the day that it came out, because just to put a little color to it, this was October 30th, 2012. Hurricane Sandy had blown through the East Coast. There was power outages from DC up to Boston. I was somewhere in the middle of a 10-day power outage. My only access to the world was Facebook. And I remember seeing that. And I remember my first thought was, thank goodness it can't be any worse than the prequels. And I will say that, and I will understand that I have changed. And again, that's really important, especially when you talk about the trolls and the grifters and the negativity and the toxicity. You can change. You can change your perspective. It doesn't mean you've sold out. It just means that things have changed for you. But that being said, I was excited that we were going to be getting more Star Wars. Nick, do you remember where you were? And do you remember what your first thought was?
I don't remember where I was. I don't remember where I was, but I do remember my thoughts. And it's the same thoughts I had, not only when we heard there were going to be more Star Wars movies, but also the same thought I had when I found out that Disney had bought Lucasfilm, which is quite simply that I grew up a Disney movies kid. I watched, still to this day, my favorite Disney movies are Sword in the Stone, Robin Hood, the classic, Disney movies. And something that Disney has always done and been known for is telling stories. Every documentary, every biography, anything you read about Walt Disney, reading about Disneyland and Disney World, making it about the illusion. The trash goes down through the ground to underground because you don't want to see, trash in Disney World. You don't want to see the character take off the head. Like everything about it, that to me was a win, because this is somebody who understands, appreciates, and of course, Walt Disney had long been dead, but the ethos of the company has continued forward. Whether it was in Pixar movies, which were an amazing, addition to all of that. Robin Hood, Matt said the other one that I couldn't come up with, the animated Robin Hood movie. But Disney knows story. And George Lucas, while visionary, technologically, conceptually, all these things, dialogue and story weren't always his strongest aspects of the things that he did. Harrison Ford says you can write it, but you can't say it. So to bring this IP together with a company who understands how to tell good stories and how to make it immersive and how to make it personal. I mean, you look at things like Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion, the people who unabashedly love these properties. This is a theme park. These are rides. But you have people who are adherents to it because it tells a story. It envelops you. It wraps you in. It grabs you with its arms and says, hey, Chewie, you're home. That's what I wanted for Star Wars. I wanted somebody to take Star Wars and go, you're in good hands. And that's how I felt. And when I heard there were going to be more movies, I went, if anybody's going to do it, these are the people I want to do it. So I was excited for it, for sure.
And the hype train took off quickly too, right? I mean, there was very early on, we knew that J.J. Abrams was going to be a part of it. Again, there was talk that there was going to be a similar model to what was happening with Marvel at the time, which still continues with Marvel. And I think now, 10 years later, we're seeing that Marvel model has its flaws, its ups and downs.
There's some limitations.
There's some limitations to it for sure. But I think what we saw was this high level of excitement. And again, I mean, if you think back to Star Wars Celebration that year, and you think back to Anthony Breznican bringing us this fall movie preview in Entertainment Weekly, the first pictures that came out, I don't know a Star Wars fan that wasn't excited. I don't know a single Star Wars fan that was not excited about this film, because we knew nothing about it. And I think that was one of the great things about it. So, before we get into the movie itself, Nick, talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on the hype train as it hit.
It was, it was everything we wanted. Star Wars is back. We had Star Wars is back in the 90s. We had Star Wars is back with Force Awakens. And there was, I'll be honest, there was a little bit of, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, that kind of situation.
Right.
But that was just it. Like, I mean, you get these panels and, J.J. Abrams and Kathy Kennedy are on screen and a robot comes rolling out, and like, it's not CGI, it's a real robot.
And it's a really weird technology that should not work in
we
physics.
We have not seen this. Like, what is happening? It's a ball and the head stays on the top. Like,
how are they doing it?
And that was what sold me, honestly, like getting that footage. And we weren't remotely in the era we are now with live streams of conventions and footage coming out. Like, I remember seeing the trailer. I think I was sitting in my car, like downloading it on my phone when the trailer dropped, because I was out of town for work and I was in the parking lot before I had to go in a meeting and act like a grown up. I was like, oh shit, Star Wars trailer's out. Let me watch it on my phone connected to the Bluetooth in my car.
You had Bluetooth in your car then? Wow. You were fancy.
I think I did. Actually, I'm sure it was plugged in with a cord. Let's not be crazy. But I don't have fancy cars to start with. But it was that thing of like, we're back. Like the hype, the excitement, everything was there. It was clicking. Yeah. We had heard, you get the little tease release photographs. You get the cast. Did we get that cast photo of them all at the read through?
I think that was a Star Wars Celebration. Yeah, with seeing Mark Hamill sitting at a table with Carrie Fisher Hamill and Harrison Ford
around the room with all these people in chairs, and you're looking at it going, "There's that one. There's that one. Okay, this is going to be all right." We didn't know anything about what it meant, but we saw the people who anchored fans, certainly of our age, back to the era that it started and was our most comforting point. Yep. And we went, okay, they're there. I don't care about the rest.
Absolutely. And that was where we went, and that was where we get into the first film. So if you're hanging out with us tonight, thank you so much. We are putting together a podcast where Nick and I are talking about the sequels. We want your thoughts. We want you to weigh in. We are going to run this though like our live show, so we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we are going to dip into the very first film, The Force Awakens, and talk about the good, the bad, and the controversy.